Yes.
I'm going to ask you some questions about testing for HIV. So, Henry, can we have PARA 5017, which is a document we've already looked at, but it really is a memory prompt. So this is a document we looked at, a letter from Dr. Swinburne to you, 27th December 1984. And, Henry, it's the last paragraph. The PHLS are now able to screen haemophiliacs for HTLV3 antibodies. A sample should be taken from each patient prior to starting heat-treated material. In due course, all patients should be screened, although the interpretation of the test in present circumstances is not yet clear, and the results should remain confidential. So first of all, just on timing, looking at that, does that prompt your memory at all as to when you think you might have carried out HIV testing on your patients?
As soon as the tests were available, we were testing. So if it was available then we were doing it.
And did you tell your patients in advance that they were going to be tested for HIV?
Not in advance, but when they came to the clinic and so on, when they have blood tests, we would have told them then. You see, also at that time, there was a very strong pressure that they must be counseled before you had a test. So we had a counsellor, we had the clinics. So we would have arranged for them to be seen, counselled, and then have the test.
So you weren't testing off stored samples, you were testing off samples that you took in clinic.
Yes.
And you were informing patients when they came in that the blood test was going to be used for an HIV test.
Yes. The memory is vague, but it wouldn't even surprise me if we got them to sign a piece of paper that, that they've been counselled and they're having the test. There was a lot of pressure at that time from Terence Higgins Trust about that they shouldn't be tested at all. In Bradford. There was there was movement that you mustn't test people. People mustn't come forward.
Because did you understand what the reason for that was?
Well, their reasons was it was to do with the freedom of individuals, and if you're going to have a test that you can't do anything about, then it's discriminatory to pick out people for the test. But that's not why we were doing it on haemophilia. That was a different reason.
And do you recall any of your patients saying they didn't want to have the test?
No.
Everybody wanted to have it, or
yes.
Yeah.
Everyone who had blood products had the test, I think, initially.
And when you say the advice was that you should be counselled before you had the test, what did you understand that to mean, and what was the practice that you put in place?
The counselling would have been in one saying why we're doing it.
Yeah. What did you understand that you were supposed to be doing? What did you actually do?
Well, when the test was there, people knew about HIV, so it was almost a routine test, not to show that they've got AIDS, but to do the antibody test, whose interpretation wasn't totally clear at that time. But in the same way as we did other tests, but that we wanted to know whether they've been exposed to the virus, which was important for us to know, but it might be important for them to know, But also there was a question of advising about how they go about with the people nearby, what the relationships are like. And
so that was counselling before they had the test. You would give them some information about
That's right.
infecting partners and so on.
Well, I think we would have talked about that probably, but we didn't know the total significance of the antibody test, and that was one of the reasons why there was objection to the test. I mean, I could see some sense in it, but obviously now we can see better sense.
And so, having got the consent of your patients, sent the tests off, the results come back. What do you do then in terms of informing patients about the test results?
People who would have had the test were the ones that would come every 3 months. These were starting with the severe hemophilics, etc. And it would, we tried to have proper clinics where the counsellor would be there, our social worker, and Pauline Sharp and so on. And so they would have been seen, but they would be first seen by me to give the test, and then Sister Sharp would probably be there with me, and then passed on next door or whenever to spend some time with Andrea.
And do you remember that, or are you can you actually remember that?
Yes, I can.
You can remember that process. And can you recall whether you...
Difficult times,
Yeah. Can you recall whether you put people in for special appointments, or whether you did it in your, the regular 3-monthly appointment?
Depended on... It was a time factor thing. If the clinics were going to be very busy, we made extra time. Andrea could see them in her own time, in her own environment, But my work was done in the clinics. The patients were spaced out, quite reasonably, and plenty of time given. But they were followed up either by Sister Sharp or by Andrea. It wasn't just 5-minute thing that finished,
So just before I come, because I want to ask you some questions about the follow-up and the counselling and so on, can we just return back to this document on the screen? It's the same paragraph, Henry, but the last sentence there. So this is Dr. Swinburne telling you that the tests are available, and she says interpretation of the test is unclear, and you've given evidence about that, and the results should remain confidential. Do you know what she meant there?
I don't know what she means, but the results were confidential. They remain in the domain of the hospital records, but the results came from public health laboratories.
But it doesn't mean, you've just told us, it doesn't mean it remain confidential from the patient. No,
not at all, no. That's why I don't know what she means. It certainly shouldn't be remain confidential from the patient. The ownership of all results are with the patient. It's their results.
And then I interrupted you were talking about the counselling that was available to patients. So you've described how they had some pre-test counselling, and then there was counselling available when they were given their results, and then you were talking about follow-up. Can you just explain to us what follow-up was available for your patients who had been infected by HTLV-3?
Well, it often raised more questions than answers. That was the problem. So they needed support. They needed more explanation sometimes. And they were fed with information in the media all the time. And there was, as you know, the popular press was full of all sorts of speculations and accusations, and there were some groups that really felt paranoid about what was said about them,
And so were people able to have, say, a course of psychotherapeutic counselling through your centre? Was that available to them?
Yes. But we also had a psychologist called Dr. Dawson, who was doing some research at the university, who also supported with the counselling. He was a psychologist. But we couldn't actually, we tried to get proper psychologist, hospital psychologist, for them to support us, and that was very intermittent, and it didn't go anywhere.
And you did some research, I understand, or at least you got ethical approval for a study into people with haemophilia to identify their emotional and psychosocial needs in October 1985. Do you recall that with
Yes,
Dr. Hunt?
That was with Dr. Dawson, the psychologist.
Okay, so that's who you're referring to.
Yeah, and then there were quite interesting findings which haven't been explored that much as they should have, because what we found was people who had psychometric testing, when they got HIV or HTLV-3, that the psychometric testing was affected, that it did affect their mental performance. We found this with leukemias, with chemotherapy and all sorts. But Dr. Dawson, I don't know whether he became ill or he had to leave after a couple
so
of
did
years.
you did complete that research and produced a paper, did you?
Only abstracts.
Abstracts. And
It never got published as a paper.
never got published.
But I mean, it applies as much now with COVID. that you do psychometric testing now, and then after COVID, you'll find people are finding big differences, that it actually does involve reduce your IQ, etc.
So your patients had access to a counsellor, to a psychologist, and a counsellor through your...
Counsellor primarily, but we also had support from a psychologist.
Through your service. And did you test partners and family members?
Not routinely, no.
So what circumstances...
But if you were requested...
If it was requested, you would test?
You would test, yeah. Interestingly, when we did test, we didn't find any partners that were positive.
Just on numbers that were infected, we've only got one document, and I don't know if you can help me interpret it. It's BTHT 602. So this is the covering letter, and it's enclosing statistics for patients treated between April 91 and March 92 inclusive. So a little bit after these years we're talking about when the tests took place. And if we scroll through the document to page 2, please, Henry. Maybe page... that's better. You can see here it says HIV/AIDS cases, and then it sets out the period, inpatient summary by district of residence stroke consultant, and then it has Airedale, and then it has your name and 2, and then if we go over the page, it has 2 pages. It has Bradford, and we can see there Minford 1, and your name 48. District total for Bradford is 53, and so on. So you go through the document with all the different areas, and the consultants with the numbers of HIV patients is set out there. Is that a document you're familiar with?
No, but because when the HIV tests came along, and we had counselling and testing and so on, there were no HIV experts in the district. There were none appointed, and there were no, for obvious reasons, there weren't. And the largest population that was positive was haemophilia. And because we had a setup, we attracted non-haemophiliacs, non-bleeders who came for testing.
To the centre? To
the centre, yeah. We were referred. And because they didn't have anywhere else to go, we were testing them, etc. But also in the private sector, people used to come for testing, at Yorkshire Clinic, and I used to see them. So these are mixed up.
Because I couldn't make sense of the numbers, because the numbers, according to this document, of your patients with HIV between 91 and 92 is 71. Impossible. And you've told us that actually you had 40 patients with haemophilia. So
these are mixed up with all others from other.
Sorry. Were you treating these patients for their HIV? You were the consultant who was testing them?
Yes, it was about counselling and testing them. So we offered that facility, but if they were positive, they would be referred on. And it mentions the GU specialist, Mohanty. For some reason, he's only got one there. I can't understand that. But we used to refer. There was another GU specialist. And there was obviously, there were also people in Leeds who were considered experts. They were actually appointed for that function.
So you never prescribed anyone AZT, for example?
No. But we did have patients with AZT then, but I didn't, no. It was something that I tried to avoid, is trying to become a HIV specialist, although I was the only one at the time. But within a few years, they appointed specialists,
And were any of your patients who had the rarer blood disorders that you were speaking about this morning, were any of them infected?
No.
No, only people with haemophilia that you were treating?
And von Willebrand's, I think.
And the von Willebrand's.
And kids. But no others, which is interesting because a lot of them used NHS material for one reason or the other.
And did you do any work to try and establish when seroconversion happened, i.e. on previous stored samples?
We didn't check stored samples, but I think there are documents which says they might have got infected in 78 or 79. Some other people had done this book. I think it was Peter Karnoff who had looked at previous samples, stored samples, and found infected people in 78, 79 samples. But we didn't.
You never did that with your patients?
No.
And did your patients know that their test results were being shared with UKHCDO? Is that something they were aware of? Do you think you discussed that with them?
Well, they were anonymized if they were shared. They were just numbers, so it wasn't that we shared the patient details. We shared numbers, but we didn't share any patient details. So it wasn't their information that was being shared. It was just statistical numbers, as far as I remember.
And then moving on then to HCV testing, when that came in. Again, can you recall when you undertook HCV testing, hepatitis C testing for your patients?
As soon as it was available from PHLS, Public Health Laboratories in Leeds, we started testing them.
And can you...
That would it be 91? I don't know.
Probably 91. We don't have the precise
well,
date from PHLS.
There were tests which were available from 1990 onwards. It was regularly used to screen transfusion, blood for transfusion, from September 1991. There is some evidence, I think, that one test or another was used on a trial or ad hoc basis at various centres in between those two dates. That's not much help.
No, but as soon as it was available to us, as soon as Public Health said, yes, we started initially antibody test, but the more important were the combined with the PCR, whether there was active virus or not.
And again, in terms of the process, what was the process that you went through when you were testing your patients for HCV? Did you inform them or ask them whether or not they wanted to have a test?
Well, they were regularly having liver function tests because if they had abnormal liver function, they knew that I was monitoring them. So when this test came along, this was just an added test to as it was for liver function. I can't honestly remember whether one had. You see, quite often they would have the test before seeing me in the clinic. So when they had the blood tests done, and I saw them in the clinic, I would tell them what was done. So, I can't remember which way it was, but certainly as the results came in, they were all discussed, including the liver function tests.
So it may be that they weren't, that their consent wasn't obtained before having the test, specifically for the hepatitis C test.
That's a possibility, but it was in combination with the liver function tests. But when we had the results, the results were never kept from them.
And then as soon as you got the results back, you shared those with the patient, presumably at their next appointment.
Oh yes, as soon as we had the results. And I never had a single person who objected, by the way.
Who objected to?
Having had the antibody test done for the hepatitis C. Not one. Like I said, sharing information was one of our strengths of the clinic.
And did you test all of your patients for hepatitis C?
I think ultimately all the patients who received blood products. We did because there was also this question that if they converted, if any of them converted, then the implication would be the batches of factor VIII that they were getting. So yes, if we were looking for abnormal liver functions and a positive hepatitis C test, that was because we were looking to diagnose hepatitis. But if they were negative, then it said that the products they've received did not contain the hepatitis virus. So there was benefit in having both, you know.
So following the tests, were you carrying out sort of look-back exercises almost to look at the products that they'd used over the years?
Immediately, if there was an element where it would help them to trace which products. Sometimes it was impossible because if they had blood products for 10, 15, 20 years, there's no benefit. But if they only had one or two products and became...
Then you would have gone back and done...
Yes, that's quite serious.
And you did do that, do you recall
Oh,
doing
we would
that?
do that, yes, absolutely.
Because in your witness statement, I only ask you that question about whether you tested all your patients, because in your witness statement you suggest that only 10 of your patients, you think, as a guess, your best
positive,
guess,
is it?
best estimate, that only 10 of your patients were HCV positive.
Yes, there weren't that many, really. There may be more. I really can't remember.
It's a slightly surprising evidence
number,
because I think is it right that you had approximately around sort of 20 to 25
Severe.
regularly treated severe
That's right.
severe patients? Do you think that some of those tests came back negative for hepatitis C?
It's possible, but a 10 seems quite low, doesn't it? If they've had a lot of factor VIII, you know.
But so you don't recollect being surprised when the results came back and thinking, oh, somebody who's had a lot of factor product in their life has come back negative. That's something you remember?
I can't recall that actually, but I think heavily treated haemophiliacs, all of them had become hepatitis, had non A, non B, and then hepatitis C positive. You know, that I think there may have been a mistake in typing or whatever, but 10 seems very low.
Again, did you test family members for hepatitis C? Do you recall doing that?
No, we've never had to. Certainly we wouldn't do it routinely, but we never had a relative that was ill, somebody was ill that we had to test, you know.
And can you recall what advice was given to patients if they tested positive about lifestyle and transmission of the virus and so on?
They had to be warned that it could be transmitted sexually, you know, with body fluids or whatever. That was very difficult, actually, because to you know, when you've got lifelong partners and they've had relations for many years, and then to be told, I think that was hard, actually. But as far as, I think we tried to tell people that this was we were obliged to tell, you know.
And would you have recorded those sorts of discussions in medical notes?
No, I don't think we would have recorded in full. Maybe it would have just said discussed or counselled. And this was also supported by our staff, by the way.
And was written material given to patients about this, about
written,
lifestyle and transmission and so on?
We had written material, printed material.
For hepatitis C?
Yes.
And for HIV?
Yes, we had, as far as possible, wherever we got printed material available from whatever source, including Haemophilia Society, that we made that available, made our job easier.
Can I, Henry, can I have PARA 606? This is a note, again, a letter from Dr. Swinburne to you dated the 13th of May 1985, headed AIDS, and it starts, the Regional Medical Committee has set up an ad hoc working party on AIDS, and we can just see there the membership does not include you, but it does include Dr. Swinburne and Dr. Tovey. And then going back to the letter, recommendations based on the interim guidelines are being formulated and documents produced by other bodies such as the Royal College of Nursing and Haemophilia Society are being taken into account. I'm just pausing there. Do you know what the interim guidelines she's referring to there are?
Well, I can't remember, but you're going to show them to me, I think.
Well, I'm not actually, but I'm just going to show you what so she says, I have made notes on those proposals there, which have a bearing on haemophilia, and suggest that before any of these proposals are incorporated into guidelines, directors should make their own views and policies known. And then says where to forward them to. And then, Henry, if we go over the page, she sets out the ones that are relevant to haemophilia, and we have one, general practitioners should be notified of the results of tests of anti-HTLV3. Now, do you recall what your practice was in relation to informing GPs of diagnoses of HTLV3 and or hepatitis C?
Whenever any patients came to the clinic, we did a letter to the general practitioner and giving our results, and so we didn't keep things back from general practitioner.
And is that something, particularly in relation to HTLV3, that you would have spoken to the patient about and explained what you were doing, or sought their consent, or come to an agreement about, or is that something you just did anyway as a matter of course?
No, the patients knew that we wrote to the general practitioner each time. We sent a letter with the results. Quite standard practice. And they knew that, that there was no problem there at all.
And then secondly, during counselling, patients should be advised to inform their dentists of their anti-HTLV3 status. Again, was that your practice to advise your patients to inform the dentist?
A lot of them didn't have dentists because dentists wouldn't come anywhere near. So we had our own dentist.
And your own dentist would have known about their,
that's right.
their status.
And it's interesting, you mentioned Mr. Mason, oral surgeon. He was very happy to, not very happy is the wrong term, but he would treat our patients if the need arose, But after that's in Hugh McCarthy, the community dental surgeon.
And then slightly out of turn on this subject, but anyway, a point on this document. If we go to the second half of paragraph 3, where it starts, the question of labelling case notes was controversial, but there should be a clear indication of the patient's anti-HTLV3 status in the case notes. External labelling, wording specifically mentioning AIDS or hepatitis, could give rise to problems from loss of confidentiality. What was your practice in relation to any external markers on someone's file about their infective status?
There was a lot of discussion on this because what we were required was to put not HTLV3 or anything, but infection risk labels on all laboratory requests, laboratory bottles, on our green cards, and we were asked to put it on the case notes as well, but not HTLV3, but just infection risk. And that infection risk would have applied to anybody in the hospital with even hepatitis carriage or any other. A lot of debate on that, but this is what we were required to do. And the reasons are obvious, especially in the laboratory where they're handling samples. They had to know.
So that's in relation to samples, but in relation to the actual case notes, so recommendation is, obviously inside the case notes there must be a record of the infection status, but external labelling, what was your practice for external labelling on
Just
someone's
infection,
notes?
No. I think it wasn't danger of infection. I think it said something in the area of infection risk.
On the actual hospital
outside,
notes?
Yes. But that applied not just to our patient, that applied right across the hospital.
Yes. And then returning then to those that are infected with HCV, you've described the counselling available for those that are infected by HIV. By the time we get to testing in the 90s, what counselling, if any, was available for people that had got back positive diagnoses for HCV?
we follow the patients with HCV regularly with blood tests because I don't know when the PCR came in, that was quite important, and we had to sort of work out, what sort of HCV they had. If at that sort of time, we would refer it to the infectious disease consultant or the hepatologist, one of the two.
If there was a positive test, they would go off and be treated by somebody else.
Yes, if the PCR was positive.
And so then, so would any counselling and psychological...
Their department would then have to look at the liver side of things.
And would any counselling and psychosocial requirements that the patients had as a result of their HCV status then be dealt with by that department rather than by your own?
Because they're their own, obviously, departments and staff and so on.
So the centre wasn't providing any counselling for HCV patients at that time?
Well, it depends what you call counselling. We did talk, we did converse about it, yes.
But in the way you describe the more formal psychologist and counsellor for HIV, that wasn't available in the 90s?
No, I don't think we did that.
And so again, you've described that anyone that had a positive result was treated elsewhere. So do I understand from that you wouldn't have ever prescribed any medication for HCV like interferon or anything of that sort?
Although, we used interferon on hematological malignancies, but I never treated hepatitis C.
In your witness statement, you describe you ask some questions about relationship between pharmaceutical companies and clinical directors, centre directors, or clinical staff, and you describe some of the hospitality given by the pharmaceutical directors as extravagant. Can you just describe for us what you meant by that?
When we went to conferences, meetings, and so on, which pharmaceutical companies were very important for us to attend meetings for all the directors, but obviously there were different grades. So the directors that were most closely associated with companies would stay in the conference hotels and have 5-star, etc., etc. And you could see that there were gradations, and you could see that as you went lower down the usage of factor 8 and numbers or type of center you were, then you may have to go into 3-star and 4-star hotels, and you could see the dinners, etc., etc. There was quite a big difference on hospitality that people got. I don't know, how far do you want me to tell you about these things?
Well,
what do you want to know?
Well, is that the extent of the extravagant hospitality you were talking about, or were there more extravagant hospitality that you had in mind when you? Well,
I'm sure there was. The bigger, the centres that were nearer working with pharmaceutical companies and so on, people who used more of the product had a lot of support for the departments, and there were individuals being employed as consultants. And I know at least one who's still working as a consultant to one of the pharmaceutical companies. There were research grants. There was all sorts of available monies from pharmaceutical companies. But in terms of meetings, we all needed the meetings, whether it's a local, national, international, whatever, because that was the only way we could send our staff. There was no money in the NHS. There was money for me as a consultant. I could ask for the postgraduate funding. I could get money. But if I wanted our nurse or people to go, laboratory staff, I had to ask around to try and get backing, Now, it's sad that it's unfortunate, because I think even now things haven't changed that much, although now they would have to declare it. Some things would be unacceptable now. What if the gifts went above a certain level, it wouldn't be acceptable at all. But at that time, it was accepted practice. It was normal practice.
And did that at the time cause you any concern? Were you ever concerned about how close some directors were to the pharmaceutical companies?
Only in that some of them were the same directors who were advising the government, or on reference. There were reference directors who were in committees that were recommending. I mean, we wanted honest advice, and we sort of made us think, well, is this purely unbiased or not? I think it was unbiased. I think we got very good guidelines from UK CDO. But it wasn't pleasant visibly to see people not declaring their interest, which they would have to now. They wouldn't be allowed to do it. It'd be scandalous. But at that time, it seemed acceptable practice to be a reference center director, be on committees that recommended the use of fact rate, and then be the advisors to the government. And these people are paid by the National Health Service, employed by the National Health Service.
Meanwhile,
so it is a bit strange,
Meanwhile, having extravagant hospitality and gifts and so on from the very companies that they're potentially putting forward as to the government.
Yes, it was. It felt a bit strange, but we took hospitality too, but obviously not. We took it largely for our staff. But remember, things are still, for most, if you look at all the educational meetings and so on for general practitioners and so on, they're still backed by pharmaceutical companies to promote their own products. So they must have been doing it to promote their products. And I think I've mentioned that we had to talk to representatives and so on. And we had more visits from the pharmaceutical company representatives than we ever had from BPL, which was, again, very sad, because they should have been acting. If they were going to act like a pharmaceutical company, they should have had a budget for it and, promote, etc., etc. If they were to be like a part of blood transfusion service, then they should have been in the same places the way you use blood transfusion, etc. But I don't think they were not businesslike enough to be able to promote themselves. And it felt very, very strange and sad for them. I felt sad for them that they were not able to compete on equal footing, with multinational companies.
And did anyone from a pharmaceutical company ever try to seek to influence your decisions about which products to buy?
Well, they were all trying to market their products, so obviously they had to say nice things about their products, but we had to prod and find out the actual and seek reassurances, seek what the products were about,
So they were marketing themselves to you during visits, but would it ever go beyond that?
No, because we would not be influenced, because at the end of the day, it was our head, it was our necks. No, but I would have liked more discussions with BPL people, which there was I complained officially that why am I not getting visits from BPL that I want to discuss things, because they were not only doing factor VIII, they were doing immunoglobulins as well as a few other products, anti-Ds.
I've had some questions from core participants to ask you, so they're going to be dotting around a bit on subject matter. So the first one is in relation to, it's really the sort of culture of the UKHCDO, that organisation, and particularly to get your perspective as someone who wasn't in the inner circle and was in a relatively small reference centre. What sort of was there was clearly a hierarchy, because there was the inner circle, as you've described it, of reference centres and so on. Was it a forum in which at annual general meetings, for example, you could challenge authority figures, Professor Bloom, for example? Was there a culture of open debate there?
was open debate with over 100 people there. So you couldn't call it, it would be very difficult to debate anything.
Yes.
And I think, me being quite young and early, I would have found it intimidating to try and speak out and so. But they were very good. Quite a few of them were very, very good, full of integrity. There were people I could listen to, especially people like Charles Ritzer, Peter Kurnoff, and so on, But the culture of I do not know of any illness, disease, where you got to hit a number to be a reference center to be a reference center. I mean, do we have a system that you got to hit 40 COVIDs to be a COVID reference center? Here you had a system where we had a full comprehensive center. We had more Asian bleeders because of the practice of consanguinity and so on. Because we didn't have 40 hemophiliacs, I think it was 30 or 40. We can't be a reference center. Do we know of anywhere where it's organized in the same way and you could predict which places were going to be the reference centers, mostly in the southeast? People had to move, hemophiliacs had to move towns. A lot of them tried to live near Oxford. Do you have to move town to get a reference center? Half the patients, hemophiliacs, were treated outside the reference centers. A system based on districts and areas would be far better. And it was all about resources. And it's, like I said, the inner circle. It was a club. Like Jeff Savage said, it's a club.
And you would agree with that?
Hmm?
And you would agree with that?
Well, they did a lot of good work. I'm not trying to... But I think it could have been organized a bit better. But I've never known anywhere where it says you've got to hit a number and bingo, you can apply. Because if you're one shot, you don't have enough experience. It's crazy. And that system is still there, by the way, But I think now we've moved on. We've got, all right, hemophilia was very important, one of the first bleeding disorders. But now we've got other bleeding disorders far in excess, and we've got thrombosis and so on. We need to move on and resource centers that are good, that are excellent, but call them by something else, but have centers of excellence. If you have renal dialysis centers, you have cardiothoracic centers, etc. You should have hemostasis and thrombosis centers, to be more equitable, but not based on hitting a number and having friends in the right places and right people to. Sorry, I'm going on a bit.
And government money following that decision.
That's right. That's what it was about, resources. It was all about resources, either from government or companies or research or whatever, But like I said, there are some people of absolute integrity, and they have done some good work. But a lot of divided opinions and a lot of divided interests in there. But I think we should learn from all this,
So going back to the discussion we had earlier about informing patients about the risk of AIDS arising from treatment with factor products. And you said that you weren't offering that information to patients, but if patients were coming to you with concerns about it, then you think you would have discussed it with them. And the question is whether you would expect to have recorded those discussions in their medical notes. Do you think that that's the sort of thing you would record in medical notes, in their clinical notes?
I think first, patients seem to be very knowledgeable. They knew the risk of AIDS, etc. So when they came, we made time to talk to them, and so did Sister Sharp and so on. So it wasn't a question of them having to ask specifically. The information would be shared. So before AIDS, we were testing for it. The topic would have risen. After testing, definitely we would have talked there'll be counselling and.
And would you have recorded
Testing.
that
No.
in the notes?
I think that either it will be recorded by me or staff, but they could be also in the nursing notes. Sister Sharp kept the nursing notes, which may be more complete than, and obviously if they did see the counsellor and so on, they would be there, but she left many years ago. But we were not allowed to do HIV testing without counselling and that to sign, that they've been counselled and they agreed to the test.
But this is before the testing. If you were having a discussion about AIDS and the risk of AIDS, would you personally, in your practice, would you have expected yourself to record in the notes a record that conversation's taken place?
Well, they couldn't have the test without signing that they were counselled.
So no, this isn't the test, not the
no,
test.
that would be not necessarily. I can't remember whether, I honestly can't. I think good medical practice would be to record it. That would be good medical practice. I think I might have, I might not have. I can't remember. But good medical practice would have said that you should record.
And another question related to this topic is to ask you this: that would you accept that by not informing patients about the risk of AIDS from blood products, that the patients lose the opportunity to take steps to prevent onward infection of their families of the HTLV3 HIV virus if they had it?
I've never deliberately not told patients about risks of AIDS from blood products. Like I said, most of them are well informed anyway, and if we knew that there was risks, then that would have been discussed at the clinic. That would have been discussed at some point. But, haemophilia care, it's very live. There's interactions going on all the time. There's the coming and goings all the time. There's meeting nurses, us, doctors, treatments, and these are happening all the time. And it would be very unusual that we would have kept knowledge that we had from patients deliberately, We wouldn't do that.
So I'd understood your earlier evidence to be that before the test came online, as it were, for HIV, you weren't routinely telling patients about the risk of AIDS from factor concentrates.
No, we wouldn't have been telling because it was still in flux.
Yes.
There were conflicting views, but if it was brought up, I would certainly tell the state-of-the-art knowledge. I would tell the patients, But I wouldn't give a false reassurance, as you saw in the letter from society,
Have you had any more questions? I think those are all the questions that I had, and I've had from CPs, from core participants as well. So unless there's...
Yes, well, let me just ask one or two questions, if I may. I wonder if we can go back to 0020293_309. This is the diagram showing the comprehensive care model from 1987, I think it is. It's HSOC. HSOC 0020293. And can we go to page 9 of that? It's the wrong model. It's the wrong reference I've got here. My apologies.
Try page 8.
Thank you. Could we just have a closer look at the diagram. Thank you. Now, this is your centre in 1987.
Yes.
If, in the case of anyone who was known to be infected with HIV, there is no reference here to there having been a GU consultant or someone expert in AIDS, apart from yourself, perhaps. Where would they go?
There was no GU, there was no HIV expert at that time. I was the first one who suddenly inherited or had all these patients with HIV.
So that would be you?
Yes, it would be.
If
but
they,
only for a short while.
If you understood that they were suffering from non-A, non-B hepatitis, or for that matter, were one of those very few who suffered from hepatitis B still, there is no reference to a liver specialist in the boxes in the middle. Where would they go?
If there was a liver, I would have to refer them. They didn't come to the clinic.
So this would not be a clinic which was comprehensive in the sense of including those specialties, apart from, say, your own knowledge, which you picked up from of AIDS, from the most practical way of all of dealing with it.
Well, if you said that a liver specialist should be included in there, then yes, it's not comprehensive then. But how can we have a liver specialist? Where would the resources come from? All these people have given their own time.
Well, the reason I ask is that in some other centres we've had evidence that there were joint clinics arranged. So did you ever arrange a joint clinic of that sort in Bradford?
No. As I stated, we have had to make do with the staff. There were no extra resources. There were only 2 consultants. And, I took on this project. All the people gave their time from their own employment. There just wasn't enough resources or rooms in the clinic, because all the rooms were occupied in the outpatients. We just couldn't have fitted any more people in there. Just couldn't have done it.
Now, the next question is this. You started as a consultant and then acting director and then director of the Haemophilia Centre in 1982 in Bradford. Do you have any reason to think that any of your patients at that time, in 1982, were then suffering from the effects of HIV infection?
In 1982, I didn't think there were any patients with HIV, although not hemophiliacs. On the ward, I had a young gentleman who was gay that had pneumonia, but he might have had AIDS. But we didn't have the knowledge or specialism to take it further than that, because even the blood test may not have been available then, No. But not with hemophilia. But I didn't think one of my patients had AIDS rather than HIV. So AIDS is different.
The gay man would have had signs that you recognised at the time might be AIDS, but you didn't know.
But he disappeared and I couldn't trace him. But having said that, the first death with AIDS in Bradford was in a hemophiliac, and that might have been in 1985, I think, 84 or 85. I think it's 85. I think it's in the records. It's 85. And it's interesting because I gave him high-dose immunoglobulins, and he responded very well. And we wrote a letter, and it's in the list of my publications. And he responded very well to that. And my last sentence on that was that immunoglobulins should be tried in viral infections. And it's interesting because it's gone around in a circle. And Mr. Trump had immunoglobulins, didn't he? So, and I don't know why they don't try high-dose immunoglobulins, because that's quite pooled, They're going for specific, immunoglobulins, but it sort of came out in a circle. But that's the last sentence I wrote in It was printed in the BMJ that it should be tried. I think the other interesting thing, by the way, I'm surprised you haven't asked me, which is still in this healthcare management, was we were the first in the world to use monoclate, which was that patient is still alive, has a family, he is not positive for hepatitis, and he doesn't have HIV. It was a different way of making factor VIII. It was using antibodies which bound factor VIII and von Willebrand, and then you added calcium chloride. You let everything else go through all the impurities, and then you added calcium chloride, and you got factor VIII. It was such a small amount and so soluble that they had to mix it with albumin to because it's so small, to make it enough volume to be able to be injected. But that was taken off the market. But monoclate went on for a long time. But that patient never got hepatitis or HIV, which was a great success, which was a great thing.
Thank you. The roughly how many patients do you think you had going through between 1982, in the usual sort of number, 1982 through to, say, 1986?
Going through?
Those 4 years, 1982.
How many patients had? Sorry, I missed the question.
Roughly how many patients were with haemophilia did you treat in the years 82 to 86, roughly?
Well, the returns, I think, started about 18 patients, but they were gradually increasing because we were getting patients from outside Bradford, as far as Huddersfield and Halifax. And I think in that period, the severe hemophilics that we treated might have gone to 26, something like that. 26, 28, something like that.
And roughly how many of the 26 or so tested HIV positive?
I cannot remember the figure.
What sort of percentage?
I don't think there were that many, actually, but Adrian Minford mentioned 4. I don't know, maybe another 6, 7, 8, something like that, possibly.
Percent or number?
Number. There weren't that.
So it would be about 30%.
I honestly I can't remember, I can't tell you, I'm sorry.
Why do you think, from patients who began in 1982, when you've no reason to think that they had any infection with HIV, through to, say, 1986, when tests were regularly, freely available, why do you think it was that about a third began to have infections with HIV?
I honestly don't know, but we were using commercial factor VIII. We were using a lot of NHS factor VIII. The usage is going up all the time. I don't know exact numbers, how many were actually infected, but they probably got infected with those materials. There was one particular. I think it's in the material I've given you, where a patient with von Willebrand got infected with just one batch of factor VIII, and I informed promptly, and all the batches were withdrawn. And subsequently, they started withdrawing the batches from 2 or 3 other hospitals very quickly. And the message there was that if you use the same material on the same patient, in this one there was a change, and that helped to withdraw all the rest. But they got infected like all other patients, and I think we found out too late, didn't we, really?
Well, you must have asked yourself, here am I responsible for the treatment which they're having. About a third end up with infection from the treatment one way or the other. How did it happen?
Well, I know how it happened, and I feel very guilty about it. It's the fact that I changed practice when I got appointed. I started getting commercial factor VIII in, started using more concentrate, even NHS, and without knowing it, I'm responsible for infecting them. but without any knowledge, you know, like so many directors, with the best intentions, you know, this happened, and all I can say is I'm sorry.
So it was the product that you were given to use that was, as you saw it, causing the problem.
Yes, unknowingly, obviously.
Did you, when people were infected, did you check back the batch numbers to see whether they probably had it from batches of concentrate?
As far as we did, well, as we knew that batches were infected, they were withdrawn. They were brought back, they were given back. This information, as it came through, whether it came through blood transfusion service or pharmaceutical companies or wherever, it was actioned immediately. You know, so yes, they were withdrawn. We didn't continue using them. We knew all the batches. It was all recorded. We had all the records in our blood bank. But we moved on with the products as well, because this is where knowledge came and said, okay, heat treatment is better than unheat treatment. Heating at, was it 60 or 80 degrees is better than 40 degrees. Wet heat treatment is better than, and so we kept on withdrawing the previous products or that had been used up and getting newer products. And then we used the monoclate, which was produced very good results, but that was withdrawn as well for some reason. I don't know.
You mentioned on a number of occasions that you were desperate for information during the time 82, 83, 84.
Reliable information.
Reliable information. To what extent do you think the lack of information may have contributed to what happened?
I think it may not be about lack of information, it's about delayed information. As you found out that the Americans had a lot of information, there was a lot of actions being taken there. The problem was bigger. But somehow there was a reluctance in Britain to accept that. I think that delay might have cost lives. I think the delay in the government recognizing how good the NHS, how good British donors are, with how good is the NHS stuff, not investing money. I mean, I've often thought about it. If it was a commercial world, if we were now in the stock market and things, and you had BPL, what they would say is, invest in them. You've got a free supply of donors, free plasma. Invest in them because our costs will be lower and our profits will be higher. And those profits could have been plowed back into getting new manufacturing plants, etc., etc. The pricing should have been in competition with the commercial factor. There should be an element built in for research and development. But what do we have? They're part of NHS, a monopoly. Government doesn't want to invest, or not enough anyway. They cannot go to the city for money or invest. They cannot ask NHS staff to invest. So I think their future was sealed. You know, it was a. When the reps came, you could see they didn't have enough of anything, really. There were only 2 reps, I think, for all of England, while the commercial companies had a lot more material, you know, a lot more muscle. So I think their fate was sealed, actually, that they would not succeed as a non-commercial concern within the NHS. But if they had that independence, suppose the government said, we're going to float you out, people would have invested crazily because here was good, solid supply of good material, you know. Mm-hmm.
I suppose another way of putting the same point would be that it would be cheaper to have invested and developed the BPL Elstree product than it would to buy the commercial product, allowing for all the profit and the uses to which the profit was put, such as marketing and commercial return.
Be a lot cheaper. The commercial companies were making, it was an absolute fortune. The profits were incredible through Factor 8, which I'm sure you're aware of, you know. talking millions and millions, and you're talking worldwide. If Elstree had produced, they'd invested and made products, and if they were allowed to have been able to sell, a lot of the world would have bought it because it was good British product, good British donors, clean. But British donors, they give their blood. If there was hepatitis, they soon trace it. If somebody got it, they withdraw. That donor is gone, well tested. You didn't need a blood test because you had been tested by giving 50 units, 30 units. Which is, it's a great thing that the British have, is their charitable generosity that they have with blood transfusion, the National Blood Transfusion Service. Well, I think it was what I call a missed opportunity. I invest a lot in shares and things, and I just felt that the BPL were not commercially minded. They didn't have proper backing. They were not supported, and all because they were in a sort of nationalized industry.
Yes, I see. You changing subject. You spoke quite a bit about the way in which, as a haemophilia centre, you would operate as a family in many ways. You're a friend because you saw your patients so often, those who were severe haemophiliacs who attended the clinics regularly. So you will get to know what they were thinking or what they picked up. And presumably, I think this is what you said, that whatever was in the press or in the media, they might reflect back to you by asking you questions about it. And you say they knew quite a bit about their condition.
They do, and I also support them because some wrote very articles that I had supported them to write in Sunday Times, and I've always backed their cause. I think as a society we failed them,
They came to you, presumably because, it must have been because you were the expert in haemophilia.
I had to learn on the job a lot. As I said, my training wasn't particularly great. I think that's something that I don't know whether the inquiry is looking at, is such a responsible post. Would you have people appointed because by accidental training? Surely UK CDO should have given guidance about how people should be trained and accredited and so on. And it was really in that there were just few centres that produces directors for themselves, for their own centres, etc.
Well, let me change the question then. You were in a position which they would naturally look up to as being the source of definitive advice.
Yes, they were actually, and I had to be honest with them. But like, as you said, in conditions, inherited blood conditions and conditions like haemophilia, you do become, and leukemias, by the way, and they were very close to me.
So you said you took your lead for information because you didn't have a lot of it from the UKHCDO.
And elsewhere.
And so if you can't remember, I think, any specific conversation, but if somebody suffering from severe haemophilia had come to talk to you, raising media concern in May 1983 or June 1983, do you think you would have told them, as being the person they were looking to for a definitive advice, what the HCDO was saying, or do you think you might have said something different?
I think that's a bit too specific, because I think what they would use a director for is to get information from several sources, try and summarize it, and bring it to a language that we could converse in, that we could actually talk. So we were like a filter, filter for all the information we got from various sources. But my patients were my friends.
So what do you think you might have said? If you can't remember, please don't try and remember. Might have said to someone who came and raised in, let's say, May 1983, said, well, I've been reading the Mail on Sunday and I've seen this thing about killer disease, AIDS, which haemophiliacs are at risk. Am I really at risk here? Am I going to get AIDS? What would you have said? If you can't remember, please say.
Oh, no. I mean, I think we're all used to the headlines that come from Daily Mail and so on. It's like I said, I think one has to play down or play up, depending what was said in the papers. But what they're looking for is interpretation by somebody who has empathy for them, who understands. I think it really depends what information Daily Mail had, because I think sometimes the newspapers have done a grand job. I think they've done a grand job trying to highlight haemophilia and the plight, But sometimes it's the other way around, they cause problems, I'm sorry, I might not be answering your question.
You aren't, but you've given an answer of a sort.
Maybe I can't answer it, I don't know.
Well, I think perhaps you can't remember specifically, so I shall forgive you for that, if I may. The only other matter which I want to raise with you is if we can have UKHCDO 40270 0_004. What I wanted to ask you about was this. This is the reference centre directors sending out a report. It's recommendations which Council took you to. It refers to a meeting of the reference centre directors on May the 13th, 1983. As far as you recollected, was this a time when there was quite a lot of concern about the risk of AIDS, the problem of AIDS?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yes. Was this a time, 1983, around the middle of the year, that there was a lot of concern in the popular press amongst those who were your friends who came to speak to you in the haemophilia clinics and so on, about the possibility or the risk of AIDS?
1983.
If we could just have a look at the heading, Henry, may give a clue, I think. This is a longish letter all about it.
I think 1983. It's difficult to
think back.
No, I think there was obviously things were happening in America.
Well, let me tell you what my question is here. The meeting is the 13th of May. The letter, if we could go back down a bit further, Henry, if we may. Sorry, up. I'm going in the wrong direction. That's the 24th of June. So it's, 6 weeks in 1983, where, if the American experience was right, there may be something which is labelled an epidemic, which is happening. Do you have anything to say about the slowness of this letter being written after a meeting of the 13th of May, at which the substance of it was agreed?
There is slowness. We've said that there's do you mean the slowness to take into account this letter, the action afterwards?
The delay in writing it.
The
delay in writing it.
Well, I think that's what I meant, that there has been delay. There's been delays all the time, every year.
That's where I was going to lead on. That's where this question was leading. There were further delays, whether in giving out information.
Yes, there was delays, but we were looking for leadership, and I think in some way it would have been good for UKHCD or whichever organization or government appointed or whatever to have collected this and taken things quicker, further, faster. Because we did have a choice, because in this country we did have a choice because there was an alternative company that they could have taken corrective measures with. That they could have reassured the population in Britain that, yes, we have a British company with the right backing, right research, right investment, may reduce the risk. I don't know, again, if I'm answering it, but the delay, I think, is critical.
Well, thank you very much.
I think in many ways, we're talking about, comparison would be like with COVID. The delay, for whatever reason, may actually cost lives. The delay in vaccination, delay in whatever. There are parallels.
Well, thank you very much. That's all that I asked, Ms. Scott.
I'm sorry if I was getting a bit tired and I wasn't concentrating.
You don't need to apologise. You've been there all day and you've been most helpful. But
Professor Parapia, is there anything you would like to say?
I would, but I don't think I can.
Okay.
If you want to, I'm not stopping you.
No, it's. I think it's just sad what's happened. It shouldn't have happened. And I think we should learn from it.
Just take a moment, please.
I've lost a lot of people I knew. I'm sorry.
You have absolutely nothing to apologise for in saying what you've just said. Can I thank you? In your gentle way, you've illuminated what life was like for a consultant and director in one of the smaller units, treating those with haemophilia in the early 1980s and through to 1990, and given us quite a practical insight into how you saw things and how things might have been seen in other places, and the relationship between a smaller unit and perhaps some of the bigger players, if I can call them that, in the field. And that's been really most helpful. Thank you very much indeed for coming, despite all the current challenges to which you've made a number of references. So our gratitude to you.
Thank you.
So we're not sitting tomorrow. I think we're back on Monday with evidence being given remotely by Professor Hay.
Preston,
Sorry,
I think.
Professor Preston, forgive me. Professor
So
Preston.
it is Professor Preston. That may be less than a day, I think, for those who are coming, but split over 2 days possibly.
Yes.
As I understand it, and then later in the week we hear from Professor Hay, do we?
Yes.
Yes. Well, till Monday then, those of you who are coming back then. In the meantime, please stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you again, those of you who return next week.